begin. So, tonight we're talking about the solar man. So, let's begin by talking about the difference between solar and lunar forces, because there is a profound difference, yeah? We've been talking about it a little bit before, and I'm not going to go too deep into it because we've given lectures in the past on it, and we'll give other lectures about it in the future too. But as we mentioned before, generally speaking, the lunar force gives mechanicity and hypnotism to the Earth. We talked about in the lunar influence lecture that everything, the power of the moon is to look after the mechanical process of the Earth. Yeah, it looks after the mechanical process of the agriculture. It looks after the mechanical process of ovulation. It looks after the mechanical process of sickness, the waters, the tides. And if we are not conscious of ourselves, then it looks after us as a mechanical being. And then we're just pushed by the forces of nature in order to constantly procreate, recreate, in order to move. So in that sense, in order to move the process of nature. So if we're looking for true freedom, the lunar force is actually against us. The lunar force is interested, just like nature, in keeping itself clocking and turning over. Yeah? So that's the force of the mechanical process of the lunar force. The solar force is the opposite. And it's interesting, and I've talked about this a lot, that when you look at all the world's religions, all the world's mythologies, all the world's folklore, the sun always has the, the place of the liberator. Do you know what I mean? It's always that way. Even the Christ in his beautiful depictions, even this one, you can sort of see it there, has the halo, has the force of the sun behind him. You know what I mean? And all of the divinities which come to completely rescue humanity are always solar divinities, you know? And so mixing with it, people don't understand that. They try to say that was just because of some like harvest ritual or some old pagan tradition. It's not true. The reality is the sun has a remarkable force because there's only two creative principles in the world. In this world in which we live, move, and have our being, yeah? Which is, at the moment, is just this world because no one has any fantastic space travel. But in this world in which we live, there's only two creative principles, yeah? One, the sun, and the other is seed, yeah? They're the only two creative principles. Nothing else really creates. Like if you make a table, you're not creating. You're taking another substance and you're turning it into another substance, yeah? I'm not talking about sort of fashioning things or, changing things. Yeah, like I said, cut down a tree, turn it into some boards, and then transform that into a piece of furniture. That's not creation in the complete sense of the word. That's not creating something from nothing. Yeah? The only things that are truly and completely and powerfully creative is the power of the sun. Yeah? Without the sun, nothing grows, apart from like algae and mold. Yeah, you know what I mean? But really, without the sun, nothing grows. It's what gives life to all things. All plants, if you see a person who doesn't have any contact with the sun for a long period of time, what do you see? The body starts to become weak, They can still live, but they don't look very happy, I saw a documentary about the people who live underneath the New York railway system. They call them the mole people. It's pretty crazy. It's kind of scary. But it's true. There's a whole bunch of people who just live, who never see the light of day. They come out just occasionally to sort of get some things and they go back under. And their skin is just so pale, It doesn't even matter if their original skin color is black or white. They still become pale and they become a bit listless. They lose the power of the sun. So the solar force has an amazing power upon the earth. And then the sun deposits within all living creatures, whether it's man, woman, within the plants, within the animals, deposits the seed within all creation. It's the force of, and we'll go into it in another lecture deeply, but the force of the prana that comes from the sun, that coming through our body eventually condenses down and becomes our sexual substance, becomes our creative sexual substance. It actually comes from that same position, that same being. And in fact, we could go so far as to say that the sun has an interest in humanity due to that, having deposited the creative power within all humanity, its creative power, that creative force, yeah? The sun has an interest in bringing into existence a solar humanity or solar man, solar humanity, solar mankind. It's a tricky lecture because nowadays you say man and everyone just gets confused. When I say man, I mean man and woman. Do you know what I mean? Mankind in that sense, yeah. They really mucked with that word in the 90s. Do you know what I mean? Everyone before that just knew, you know what I mean? It's just, okay, you mean man and woman, of course, you know. So that's what I mean. So to create a true solar being, a true solar man. Okay, so let's go into our current position. As we are now, and as humanity is now, we are just an essence. That's what we are. We talked about that in previous lectures. We are an essence. We are a deep in, like what we are life to life. What moves from life to life. Yeah, when I die in this life and I'm born into the next is the essence, right? That essence comes from our own internal divinity, our being. That's like you imagine like a little spark like that comes from our interior being. Our being is our own divinity. And then that being is a little spark that comes from the greater absolute. Or agnostos theos, God unknown unto himself, often referred to as the God of the Gnostics. In Kabbalah, which we just studied last week, is called Ayin, which means absolute abstract space. The absolute. Yeah, the absolute abstract space. Sorry, it is the absolute. It doesn't mean that. It has a different meaning. But it means, Ayin means no thing, not nothing, but negative existence, pre-existence, as it were. So our being, our divinity, is a little spark of the great ocean of life, and then we are a little spark of that. That's what we are. And part of our mission, and what we teach here in Gnosis, for those who are coming for the first week, is how to take ourselves from this little essence that has become sort of trapped in the ego, because that's sort of what's happened. Little bits of essence are trapped bottled within the ego, seeing things through the incorrect glass of desire, to free it and free the essence and take it back to the being. That's sort of the process of the Gnostic goal in an incredibly condensed form. So, in that sense, the position that we're in now as an essence, is we are not, even though we have this solar substance within us, we're not a solar humanity. In fact, Samael says the reason why the sun has such a beautiful shine and such power is that the humanity that lives upon the sun are completely Christified. They are 100% awake. Each and every one of them has the Christ incarnated. What we will talk about at the end of the lecture, superior to man, the Superman, the Christ is incarnated within them, completely awake. And because of that, they are completely perfect. But in our current condition, the way that we are as a humanity, is we are actually more of an intellectual animal. Rather than having this great capacity and power that we're supposed to be given. Remember that Dante Alighieri talked about it in the Divine Comedy. He says those who exchange their birthright for a plate of lentils. We have this power, this capacity within us, but instead of expanding it and using it to create something inside, we just lose it out into the world constantly. We lose it, of course, directly through the action of fornication, but also just even through the senses. Every day we lose all of our energy. We go to bed tired. We go to bed exhausted. We expend all of our energies. Even when people try to meditate, they often struggle because mostly meditation just gives you enough energy to sort of deal with the next day in a better way than just slogging through it, as it were. So in that sense, right, the position that we're in now is an intellectual animal. And this is why science identifies man as an animal, even though that's not really technically true. When you look at science, they always talk about us being a mammal. They justify many of our sort of grosser behaviors as being animalistic instincts and therefore nothing we can do about it. There's literally hundreds of studies about these sorts of things, where people sort of try to justify behaviors. I remember a man, I was working once in a cafe and there was this guy I was working with, Sinisa. He was like a Eastern European guy, but he was like one of those Eastern Europeans who wore like the tight clothes like that. And was sort of like, hey, are you going there, bro? Like that. He was a lot of fun. Really, really funny guy. But he used to really want to talk about women all the time. Like a woman walked past, he wanted to explain what was on his mind when she walked past. And I didn't partake. I wasn't interested. I liked to make the coffee. I didn't like to make comments about women. And I remember he just got more and more frustrated as I would ignore his behavior. A woman would walk past and he'd go, hey, bro, hey, bro, yeah. yeah, you know what I mean? And then he'd say something disgusting. And I would just sort of the entire time just be, you know what I mean? Or I'd look and go, that is a woman. You're correct. In fact, in that case, I would say that she's probably more like 17. I'm going to say she's a girl. You know what I mean? He'd be like, yeah. And we would sort of go through this, and I just kept ignoring his behavior because I didn't want to partake in this sort of stuff, and I'd already been down that road with other people. And eventually I remember he lost it at me, and he talked about evolution, and he had a complete and utter mental structure behind why men had to comment sexually on women that they saw, because it was what made one truly human. And he gave me this whole conversation. He goes, ever since we were caveman and we see the woman, instead of hitting every woman on the head, now we hit her with her amazing words. And I was just like, what? And he started talking about how important it was and how he was going to teach his son. And my father taught me this, and now you need to learn. Because he was like, what's wrong with you, bro? What's wrong with you, bro? Every time I come to you with happiness and joy, you just ignore me. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about women. And he, no, this is the way it is. And he really had this evolutionist theory behind why men had to comment on women, because it would make them men. Otherwise, they were basically, not men. I don't know. It was crazy, I've heard a lot of this sort of stuff. I remember the same thing about my friends used to buy kebabs off a guy, and he had a similar sort of theory that if you didn't have a beard, you were basically a woman. I thought that was the best. That made me laugh so much, considering the Romans conquered the whole known world, and calling people barbarians meant that they weren't shaven. But it's like, I love it. He'd say, he's like, hey boy, you come here, come on, we gotta have this beautiful kebab, And he said, what's wrong with you? Why you shave? You look ridiculous. Look, I tell you, the only thing that is different between you and me, he says, constantly we change the rules in the world of what is man and what is woman, But he says, one thing is for sure, man, you have a long beard, nobody call you woman. He said, so if you don't have a beard, you're basically a woman. And I was like, this is insane, But anyway, people come up with some fantastic theories. So science talks about us being an animal, and that's because in the current state we basically are. See, in Gnosis, we want to teach our students to completely and utterly free themselves from the bounds of creation, to leave this sort of constant just coming back of the samsara of living life after life, going through the same problems, the same dramas, comedies, and tragedies, living the same day over and over again, doing the same job, etc., etc. And for that, many of these different schools, they talk about that for that to happen, we have to accept divinity. And this is sort of accepted, as it were. We accept that and you see this in all religions, if we want to free ourselves from creation, we need divinity. Yeah? In Gnosis, of course, we use the word being, but we need the being. You want to free yourself from creation, you need the being. But here's the thing, yeah? There's an interesting story, what's it called? Book by Friedrich Nietzsche, where he talks about the Superman, yeah? And he talks about the Superman. He says the Superman will come, and that caused some problems. This is being recorded for YouTube, so I can't talk about what those problems were. You understand what I mean? But let's just say he was very confused on what the Superman was, when Adolf Hitler was extremely confused on what the Superman was. But everybody was. Yeah? The Superman was never a physical thing. Nietzsche talked about a Superman, about creating the superior man. That's what Superman meant. In fact, later on, they would create this whole idea, and I've talked about this in class before, about the Superman. The comic book Superman was actually designed as a way to destroy in people's minds the idea of divinity. Yeah? Because Superman isn't Superman, right? Do you know what I mean? Superman is a man who, A, doesn't know how to dress himself. He wears his underpants on the outside. 2, he doesn't have gender, which doesn't make any sense, because Superman, being a man, should therefore have a penis. I'm sorry to say the word, but it's true. It's the reality. He's just got nothing. Third, he can't hold down a relationship. Just can't. The entire time he's constantly leaving Lois to save the world, and as any woman would know, the last thing you want is a man who's constantly going off trying to please everybody but you. Yeah. Sorry, darling, I can't come. I've got to fix everything at work first. Do you know? Oh, no, I've got to save the world. Superman should have let the meteorite hit the world so that he could spend a good afternoon with Lois. Do you understand? That's the reality. So that whole thing was about destroying Friedrich Nietzsche's understanding of Superman. It's true. The people who, the men who got really obsessed with that cartoon as children and then grew up, they're not interested in divinity or anything. Yeah, they're just interested in some fantasy world. They've lost the truth. Yeah, the truth of the Superman, or Das Übermensch, was actually about incarnating the Christ. His explanation of the Superman was exactly the same as a man who had incarnated divinity, a man who had become one with his own interior divinity. But as we've learnt in Gnosis, and as Samael teaches us, the problem is that when Nietzsche talked about becoming a superman, becoming superior to man, he didn't realize that most of humanity wasn't just a man. And this is the sort of point of the talk, is that we have become like an intellectual animal. We spend a lot of time like an animal, going around, acquiring things, getting food, living for sensations, all this sort of thing, And in a sense, we just live as a superior animal. You see, humanity is supposed to be completely superior. Mankind is supposed to be completely superior to the animals. We're supposed to dominate the animal kingdom. And yet most people don't. Do you understand what I mean? If a person truly had that power within them, they would be able to completely dominate nature. You saw the person who had the complete power, like you see in the teachings of the Christ, where he was able to silence the storms, where he walked upon water. He dominated the four elements like they were nothing to him. You hear the same stories about the Tibetan lamas, who were able to just completely and utterly move mountains the same way, who could make the mountains vibrate with their word. This is in effect what it means to be a true man, what it means to be a true man or true woman, a person who is completely, a person who has a relationship with divinity. Yet that's not what we are. We don't have a relationship with divinity. Most people walk around having no idea if there's a divinity. It's like the dyslexic insomniac. You guys ever heard the joke about the dyslexic insomniac? He stayed up all night wondering if there's a dog. Because he's dyslexic, so he says dog instead of God. He's insomniac, so he stays up all night. Just in case that was lost on you. It is a bad joke. But, so anyway, in that sense, we want to become a true man, yeah? And that's what I have to explain. It's interesting that Christ talks about in the Bible, he literally says to Mary, I will make you a man, and no one really knows what that means. No one gets that. I'm sure the trans people are very interested. But at the same time, they don't actually know what it really means. They don't understand the depth of that teaching. And that's because it's an esoteric teaching. And like all esoteric teachings in the Bible, it goes straight over everyone's heads because you have to be educated to know it. So what this means, is this. We are an essence, right? And we live constantly in 7 worlds, yeah? We all know that we live in the physical world. That's obvious, right? What maybe a lot of the people who in Byron here would accept the etheric or vital world because of all the healing that happens here in Byron Bay. Many people do these sorts of healing with hands and healing works, and that's all using the vital body. To draw it, it's like that. We have a physical body, and then we have the vital body. And the vital body provides the energy, often called the etheric body, it's a magnetic field of energy that is around the body, and all of the energy of our life is stored within it. When that's all drained, then the physical body starts to go into disrepair and dies. If a person would know how to keep their vital body continuously sustained, they could live for much longer periods of time, which is why in history there have been people who've lived for a very long period of time, who've been able to do that because they understood the vital world. In Atlantis, they knew about the vital world, which is how they were able to create, extend life and do these great magical works that they did in the age of Atlantis. Anyway, so this is the physical and the vital. We also live in the astral world. Yeah, the astral world is where we go in our dreams. It is that beautiful place where we experience the a world of less laws. There's 48 laws that govern the physical world, whereas only 24 in the astral. Laws of time, space, and gravity don't exist there, which is why we can fly, spend a whole night there, and feels like weeks or feels like no time at all, you know. And that's experiencing the astral world. Above that is the world of mind. Yeah, the whole world exists in the world of mind. We talk about that in the Universal Mind Talk. There is a universal mind. Everyone's minds are within all minds. At the moment, we're all living in the mental atmosphere of Byron, if you understand what I mean. There's a certain mental atmosphere everywhere you go. When you go into a house, you feel the mental atmosphere of the people. If a person spends all their time completely losing their mind in a corner somewhere, often you go into the house, you can feel it. You can feel the I don't want to say craziness because you're not allowed to say that anymore. You know? But you can feel the intensity of the emotions in that moment. You can feel this constant thoughts, yeah? So we live in the mental world and we have our own mind. And we live in the world of will, except in our case, most of our will is consumed by the ego, which means we live mostly consumed by ill will, meaning the will of the ego or desire, which controls us. We then have the world of conscious and the world of spirit. The world of spirit is where our being resides, our true internal divinity, the source of our life itself. And our consciousness, our consciousness is what should be running the mind and the emotions. If the consciousness were awake in a moment, then the mind and the emotions would be in the correct state. When our consciousness is not awake, the mind and the emotions actually dominate us and keep us asleep. So the emotions become desire and then dominate us searching for sensational fulfillment, and the mind dominates in its constant reasoning and thinking. Even good thoughts, the mind can think about God all day and do nothing because it just thinks. It can't experience God, it's the mind. It can't do anything. All the Buddhists understood this. That's why they just sit and wait for the mind to shut up. The whole point of Zen is to sit until the mind shuts up. That's the whole of Zen right there. That's literally all they do. That's why when everyone says, what's the story of Zen? And he says, nose vertical, eyes horizontal. And people are like, what? What's the meaning of Zen? What a lovely mountain. What's the meaning of Zen? And then, the meaning of Zen is just life as it is. In other words, life without mind. Yeah, life without thinking about it. Life without looking at a sunset and then pulling up your phone and recording it and adding it to your sunset folder and going, this is quite a good sunset. Do you want to see the sunset from 3 days ago? It's pretty good. I might make a sunset playlist and sort of chop it up a little bit, you know what I mean? Maybe like have them pop in and out, you know, put some filters on or something, you know? So, okay. Consciousness, fantastic. So we're constantly existing in these different realms, but we don't have a center of gravity. We have a body in the physical and vital world. What I've drawn here, this is the Kabbalah. We were talking about it last night. And so it's just the same as this, but just in this pictorial diagram. So we have a physical and a vital body. That's true. But we do not have a mental body, an astral body, or the human soul. In other words, a body of causal will. And this is very important, meaning we don't have a center of gravity in those worlds. Yeah? The mind ends up controlling you all the time. Yeah? Some of the worst decisions that you make in your life are with the mind. Literally. Because you sit there and you weigh up the options with imperfect information, thinking you know what you're doing, and then make a terrible decision. This happens constantly, even on the day-to-day. You look at a menu, right? You go into a new place, you've never got coffee there before, and you look at the menu and it says, you know, roasted avocado with a capsicum, roast capsicum and a balsamic glaze or something. You think, that sounds pretty good. That sounds all right. And the other one says, you know, just says eggs on toast. And you're like, but that sounds more fancy, you know? And then you're there and your husband, he gets one thing and you get the other thing, and then you're looking at it and then his one looks better. You've already made the wrong decision with the mind. you know, no, this one sounds better. You know, I worked with a guy once, he did that. That man was, he had an evil word. I can only say it as that. He had a diabolical intelligence. He taught me a lot about the world. I was 18 when I worked with him, and he showed me that people can be insincere. It was good to work with him. But I remember once we had the specials board, and it just used to say like fish, and it would say barra and chips. And then the next thing would say this and this. And it was all very simply written. And one day, he just was feeling a bit fun. He goes, I'm feeling a bit fun, Michael. He's a very camp guy. Feeling a bit fun today, Michael. He used to call me Michael because he enjoyed using my full name. And he goes, and then he wiped the whole thing down and he wrote the most complicated names of everything. He was like, deep sea court, brim or something like this, marinated in a slow crumb bake or something. That in reality, all the words he used were meaningless. He was very intelligent. He didn't technically lie. He just wrote so much flowery nonsense on the board. I remember the people would come because we just used to it was in the train station, so we just got the train station staff, and they were just looking at him, like, what happened to the fish and chips, mate? and he goes, we've just been changing things here, we're trying to bring in like a different kind of demographic, if you understand what I mean. And he was just so funny. But he was right. He tried to show, he wrote the soup, which was just like a Maggi stock-based soup, you know what I mean? And he wrote this huge thing, you know what I mean? Italian, I can't remember how it was. Italian, what's it called? Minestrone but he kept all of the names he used, he used funny names for the vegetables that I'd never heard before. He used French names for some of the vegetables to make it sound. What's that? He says, it just means carrot. And he's just writing all this stuff, and everyone's like, and a few people walked in and went, ooh, wow, that looks good, And it was true. It worked, But at the same time, on our side of the thing, when it said, what is it, char grilled chicken, because the chicken was so processed, he wrote char grilled dolphin on the back of every single one of them because he said, you really don't know. And so this guy was he was venomous with his word, amazing, But anyway, a bit of a tangent there. But what I'm trying to point out, we constantly use the mind, and it lacks a complete view. Yeah, the mind is always subjective. It's always from my point of view. We're never entirely sure. The consciousness can perceive other people. The consciousness can communicate with the conscious and subconscious of other people. If I become conscious of myself, I can also become conscious of other people. Using the consciousness, I can actually experience the reality of another person in front of me in a given moment. Experience within them to become conscious of their being as well. I can actually become aware of them in a moment. And I mean, not just put yourself in their shoes mentally, going, oh yeah, he looks all right. I maybe had a hard life. I should, be nicer because maybe just had a difficult time. I don't know, But actually in a moment, to actually feel it, to really feel it, to actually be that person for a moment. Everything, you experience their upbringing, everything, just for 2 seconds. The consciousness can experience that. It's the consciousness that can know something objectively, as opposed to us reasoning it with the mind. So at the moment we have mind. What we have, I'll write it here, is we have mind, desire, and ill will in place of a legitimate astral body, a legitimate mental body, and a human soul, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So that's the position that we're in right now. So if I want to unite with divinity, I need to upgrade that essence that I am, the essence that we are, the true nature that we have inside ourselves, the essence that's experiencing life, has to become a soul. And this is a thing in Gnosis. Okay, in essence we are, a soul is something that we actually incarnate. See, the word soul means an astral mediator, or a mediator between man and God. That's what it means to have a soul. A soul is to have that connection. Yeah. In the Kabbalah, for instance, remember I said we got the physical and vital bodies here, and then that's the soul, and then this is the superior parts of the being up here. So you can see the soul acts as a go-between here, and also between these higher parts of the being as well, between the consciousness and between the spirit, or our being. So in that sense, the soul is something quite profound. But the soul is something that is created through the process of alchemy. And this is sort of the point, is that we can't create the soul by thinking about it. You can't create the soul by good vibes. Do you know what I mean? Right? I see that a lot of the time. You drive around, everyone has on the back of the car, good vibes only. Do you know what I mean? Good vibes only on the back of my car. No, you don't come to me with bad vibes. You come, and maybe I cut you off. but it says good vibes only. Do you know what I mean? You're like, no, yeah, the good vibes, like that, Good vibes only, though, yeah? That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm trying to say, none of this creates soul. If the soul could be created mentally, then it wouldn't be too hard. Everyone would just have to think really good things about the soul. Maybe some super intellectual scientist might accidentally create a soul by thinking really hard about it. Yeah? But it's not. The mind can only create things with mental substance, or it can only move things together that are already created. Through the mind, you can come up with a great design for a new table, looking at other designs for tables. Yeah? You can come up with a new look. I love that. When you say, it's the new me. I'm going to change my hair color, and I'm going to change the clothes that I'm wearing, and it's the new me. Yeah? It's the new me. But in reality, the new you is kind of like when you buy an old rental house and you put down new carpet, one coat of paint over smoke-stained walls, and a couple, new fans and some blinds. It's still the same person underneath. You haven't really changed someone just by changing the physical exterior. You have to change your psychology for that. So, to create the soul is something quite demanding, as it were. To create the soul is actually done through the process of alchemy. See, the alchemy is the teachings of transmutation or sexual transmutation. As I said, if it could be done simply with with mental dynamics, that would be fantastic. But it's not. The only thing that can create a body is the sexual act. The only way we create a body, like a little baby, we have a beautiful baby in the room today, is through the sexual act, is through conception. And it's that same power, that same force, that same connection that can, through the alchemy, which is the transmutation, that can create an internal body. Meaning, if I want to create an astral body, a mental body, and to engender the human soul, it can only be done through the alchemy. There will be elements of death in that process. There will be elements of death in the ego that must be done for it to be done properly. But at the same time, if I want to create an internal body, it can only be done the same way we create a physical body, through the process of white tantra, the alchemy, transmuting the seed. And so what we're doing is we're taking that seed that in the physical world, like that, if used for a physical reason, like just a normal sexual act, we can create a physical child, and we transmute it. Meaning we take that energy. I don't have it. Oh, it's in the hallway. I'll draw it here. Okay, that's not it. I haven't got enough space.
I'm gonna grab it.
What? Yeah. Just grab it. Grab it. It's easier. I haven't got enough board space here. It's just, it's not quite an anatomically correct one because it has like 7 crossovers as opposed to 3. Sorry? Oh, we kind of have one here, eh? With the snakes. It's actually the same sort of thing. But that's okay. Brad can bring the fancy dancy one. This was also bought in an op shop. Okay. Thank you, Brad. Okay, so this is a replica of the spine. Here, through the middle. It's the same thing. And upon the spine, we have creative currents that move our sexual energy. When we breathe, it usually moves up the side currents. I still have to draw it. It's not going to work. So, when we... let's make some space here. So, like this. This is our spine. And then we have here, like that. And then we have here, like that. There we go. Okay. So everybody has this. Everybody has, within themselves, this simple sort of design. We all have. This is the apparatus, upon which the sexual energy moves. Yeah. So the sexual energy is stored down in our coccyx, at the base of the spine, like that. Yeah. And in here, in the triveni, which is the point right in the at the base of the spine, there is the sacred fire, or the kundalini is asleep. Yeah. But here in the coccyx, our sexual energy is. And when we breathe, yeah, we actually breathe up like that. And so when we practice like Hamsa, which is a transmutative exercise, I'm drawing the sexual energy from, in the woman it's the right and left ovary, in the man it's the right and left testicle. I'm drawing that energy up the spine, yeah, and I'm drawing it through the coccyx, it crosses again at the heart, and it comes again to the third eye. Like that. And normally, people just lose this. Yeah, when they practice sexual act, they just lose that energy. Reaching the orgasm, we just lose that sexual energy, and it's lost into the world. And as I said too, we also just lose it in general through the senses too. We lose it by just constantly being fascinated by life and fulfilling our desires all the time, but mostly through losing it physically. Now, the alchemy is the process of actually transmuting that energy. So rather than just lose it from the system, I then draw it up and transmute it. I take the gross, by gross or brute energy, that is the actual physical substance from the coccyx, and then it is drawn up. Yeah. So when we are practicing white tantra, we are moving that energy up the spine like that, up the spine and into the brain, and then also back down to the heart again. And that's the mystery of the shepherd's crook. You see how the Egyptian pharaohs used to hold a shepherd's crook, and it's funny, you know the reason why modern science, anthropological science, says that. They say they had the shepherd's crook because everybody needed wheat, and everybody needed sheep, and the shepherds just started off as running a sheepfold. I'm like, come on, man. That's not it. What it is, it's about moving that energy. The energy that is stagnant inside of us and often lost, we then start to move it. And so that, like the alchemists say, that raw mercury is then transmuted into real mercury and then eventually into the mercury of the wise. And what happens, that process of transmuting it, also eventually over time, as we use this alchemical act, it will slowly start to create these internal bodies. And so what will happen is the kundalini will awaken, meaning that within myself I have this great power, this great capacity that lies dormant. Yeah, it's the bronze serpent that Moses raised in the desert. Yeah, we have this great capacity. Yeah, it is the same capacity that can also lead to our ruin. In fact, we talked about that in the Origin of the Eye talk, that it can lead to our ruin. That's exactly the tail of Satan, the tempting serpent. That same serpent, if it takes over us, it will draw us into the inferno, which pulls us down like that. But if we wake up that kundalini through that process of transmutation, of actually transmuting that one raw sexual substance into a higher creative substance like that, and constantly moving that up the spine like that, what's going to happen is that eventually we'll awaken this kundalini fire. And first, it will be awakened in the physical body. Yeah? Then, through transmutation, it will move up, and then it will awaken and move through the vital body. Yeah? This is what happens. So the kundalini first goes to the physical body, then it goes to the vital body, and then, when it comes to the astral, if we don't have the astral body, which many people do not, when we go to the astral, we have like no center of gravity. Some people already have it created from a past life. That's why you meet people who can literally go to the astral at will. I've met people like that. I've talked about it. I have had friends who've come to my group who have an amazing astral capacity. Just perfect. They want to go to the astral tonight. They just go to the astral. Yeah. Here I am doing all special practices, doing my Farah on, not looking at my phone all day because the short form media destroys your brain and makes it impossible to concentrate, which means you can't do... These exercises don't work when you spend your whole day on your phone. They just don't. You can't concentrate because you're literally constantly scanning and taking these tiny little impressions one after another, and your mind becomes divided and it becomes almost impossible. That's why literally watching a movie for an hour can maybe make you a bit tired, but sitting on Facebook for an hour can ruin you. Or TikTok or something, that's it. You're done in 20 minutes. So anyway, so what happens is if we don't have that astral body, then it will be created. So the transmutation will then go to creating the astral body. The movement of the Kundalini as it rises up, the atoms will actually be created, and then we will have an astral body. When a person has an astral body, that means they have a center of gravity in the astral world. Many people can go to the astral at will after that, or we have a much increased astral capacity. Depends on our karma. Yeah, how well we did in our past lives, how we used our astral body previously. But in general, the person will get a center of gravity. This helps a lot on working on desire as well. Then, again, the Kundalini will rise again and go through the mental body. Again, if the mental body is not created, it will create the mental body. That's what's going to happen. That energy will go into the creation of the mental body until it reaches here. And the process that will happen when one creates the mental body, we then have 51% control. Sorry, 60%. I got a bit confused. I was thinking of something else. 60% control of the mind. Currently, we have about 3% control of the mind. Which means, and that's why it's very hard for us. We try to take up a new course of study. We try to change something about our lives, and within a month, we find ourselves going back to our old ways because we have no control over the mind, and the egos of desire are too powerful. And therefore, we find ourselves unable to go against them. Whereas when we have the mental body, we have 60% control, which means when a negative thought comes, we can just go, I'm actually not going to think that now, and it's gone. Yep. Having that control over the mind allows us to actually work. We still have to work on the thoughts. We still have to die in the mind. We still have to work on the ego, but we have much more control. And then when the Kundalini rises again, it will go through the causal or the will. And this is the creation of the human soul. Yeah. This is what creates the human soul. Now, the human soul is talked about a lot. In literature, the human soul is the hero. Yeah. When we see the beautiful, like you have a Andromeda, there being attacked by the disgusting serpent of fornication, she represents the divine soul, the feminine soul within ourselves, and then she is rescued by the human soul. And the same thing with the story of what is it? Theseus. I forget, who does Theseus rescue? Oh my god, my brain's not going to work there. Do you remember, Dante? He gets put in the labyrinth. I can't remember. But the knight saving the woman is actually a interior allegory. What that represents is it represents the human soul rescuing the divine soul within. Yeah, it represents the creation, the human soul created, moving, and then working with the divine soul, rescuing that internal process. So, therefore, this human soul, right, then gives us this link that we didn't have before. We have to, before that, we pray to the being, and we don't know. Yeah, people do this. Everyone says, "Oh, God works in mysterious ways. We don't know." Occasionally, maybe you hear some sort of information, but we don't know. Many people, and most people, live this way. Religious people live this way. They live mostly upon their beliefs, but they also have perhaps like a little bit of connection to divinity. Maybe had one experience here and there. Hopefully, otherwise, why do it? You know what I mean? But generally speaking, they usually have one or two experiences that hold them in, but they're not communicating with the divine reality all the time. In fact, many people want to have this. This is why they go and take drugs, because they want to have that communication with divinity. So they go and take some sort of drug or something to try and sort of circumnavigate the difficulty of that process and find a shortcut to that feeling or that closeness to divinity, if you understand what I mean, to have that feeling. But really, to have that, one needs the soul. The soul must be created, yeah? And then when we have that, then we are actually close to the being. Then we are actually one with it. Then we can actually communicate with our interior divine being. Yeah? Before that point, we're just living in the dark. So once that happens, then a person can actually go forwards, yeah? Then, and this we've talked about this before, about We've talked about the incarnation of the intimate Christ, yeah? We've talked about that previously, right? The incarnation of Christ. But to reach that point, yeah, if we're talking about the Kabbalah, the second Logos or Chokmah is the Christ. And to become a Superman or superior to man, this is man. A person who possesses the soul is a man. Humanity used to be like this. In the ages past, in Lemuria, everybody already just had the human soul. But as we fell and fell and fell into the generation that we live now, with the ego taking full control, we've all lost that, and we're now just an essence. We're just a fragment of the soul. So once the soul is then created, then we can go through this even deeper process, which we'll talk about in later lectures because it's a whole other thing. And that is the incarnation of these higher principles even again, to incarnate the Christ, to then have that. And incarnating the Christ isn't about having some sort of like fantastic power. It's actually about that process being given over. And that's why you see when Jeshua ben Pandira lived the story of the Christ publicly, yeah, when he had that beautiful stories that you find in the Bible that we're actually going to study in our upcoming retreat, really lovely. What he was doing was he was living the process of the intimate Christ, the one that is incarnate into yourself publicly. And that's what he was talking about. When he's talking about to experience your Father in heaven, to give yourself over to the Christ, he's talking about giving yourself over to the intimate Christ. Yeah. And that once we have the intimate Christ, then we experience the cosmic Christ, which the intimate Christ is a part of. The Jokmah, the second Logos. But again, it's actually quite a superior teaching, because what humanity needs first is the soul. Yeah. And to create that, first, these bodies have to be created. To have a center of gravity in all these worlds. And that is the proper development of the Mercury or the seed within man. That is the proper outcome of the solar experiment. The sun, the cosmic Christ, wants solar men and solar women, wants humanity to awaken to their greater potential. Yeah, wants them to not just awaken consciousness, but to create the soul and then to be integrated into divinity. When the soul is created, we are made a little bit divine, but the divine is also made a little bit human. That's part of the whole process. Yeah. Otherwise, we're not just here like some sort of cruel game. You know, the being doesn't just throw them down there and be like, you know what I mean? The process is that the being comes to know, actually to go further, the absolute comes to understand itself through its opposite. The being cannot live in creation. The being cannot experience all of the degeneration and everything, because that would be to taint God itself. You know what I mean? That can't happen. But through the process of the alchemy, the creation of the soul, the work on the ego, all of this experience of creation is boiled down to just a few atoms that are eventually reintegrated back into divinity. And then divinity comes to know itself through humanity. Therefore, the divine is made a little bit human, but we are also made a little bit divine. People get really hung up on human becoming divine. Everybody wants to be divine. Do you know what I mean? Everybody wants to be the super duper cool, amazing spiritual person. Yeah? It's actually quite a big problem I see. You know, people will have a fantastic internal experience and they'll go and start a cult. Yeah? They'll do it. I've seen it. There's heaps of them around here in Byron. Tons. They'll have this fantastic experience. And they'll experience the absolute, no, not the absolute. They'll usually experience something in here, you know, experience their own inner being. And they'll go, that's it, I'm awake. I'm awake. Oh my God, I am God. And then everyone should give me money. And I just don't understand. They don't start that way. You know what I mean? But it's like, oh, that's it. I'm the super duper man. I'm so cool. I'm amazing. I am divinity. And it's like, yes, but you're also nothing. It's true. Don't forget where you come from. That sounds harsh, doesn't it? But it's true. Don't forget where you come from. You come from the mud of the earth. And when you understand that really deeply, you can then give yourself over to the Christ and you can be happy. But before that, we keep trying to do it all ourselves. It's a tricky process because you do sort of have to do it yourself to get there. There's a certain point. You know, what's it? You know, pray to Allah and tether your camel. Do you know that story? You know that one? It's like pray to thy God and strike with thy rod. Like, you've got to actually do a bit of work. You know what I mean? You ever? Come on. This lecture's far too serious. I have to tell a joke again. So, you ever heard about the lady? She was having a really hard time, and so she I don't know. She goes through a lot of hardship. She's got the children and everything. It's very difficult for her, and the husband dies, and she's there, and the bills start stacking up, and so she gets on her knees and she prays to God. She says, God, please help me, take me out of this misery, look after me. She goes, give me the lottery, help me win the lottery, and then all my problems will be solved. And the week goes by, she doesn't win the lottery, so she sells stuff from the house just to feed the children. It's getting horrible, it's getting hard. And she prays again, God, please help me win the lottery so that I can solve all my problems. And another week goes past. Now she's sold everything in the house, and it's just her and the kids sitting there and staring at a blank wall because there's no TV. She gets again, please, God, help me win the lottery, please. And then, another week goes past and she has to sell the house, and she's sitting on the side of the road, and she turns to God and she looks up in the heavens, she goes, to hell with you. She goes, I prayed to you. I worked, I prayed hard, and you gave me nothing. Look at it. My children are on the sidewalk. We've lost the house. All I needed was the lottery, and I would have been fine. And then suddenly, the heavens open. Oh, the great experience of God. And he says, lady, help me out here. Buy a ticket. And the idea of the joke is, yeah, you pray, but you also have to work. Do you know what I mean? You have to put some effort in. Yeah, so there is a certain point on the esoteric path where the process gets given over to the Christ. The Christ is called in Gnosis the divine prototype of perfection. The Christ will take over the process and will bring you back to the absolute, or the Salvador Salvandis. The Salvador Salvandis, the saved Savior. It means a Savior who comes from the absolute in order to come and then take us back. The Pistis of Fear tells that story of the repentant essence suffering in creation, turning and asking for help, and then being brought back into the bosom of the absolute. Yeah, a beautiful story. But always there has to be work on our own part, but not just on our own part. And that's where people get confused. Someone has a beautiful internal experience and then decides that they are the being after doing nothing. Happened to my father. My father did a bit of transcendental meditation, and then he experienced the illuminating void. He felt himself one with every star. He was awake. He felt fantastic. And so he decided, being a bogan from Townsville, that he was now enlightened. And once you're enlightened, what do? Well, you don't really know what to do when you're a bogan from Townsville. So he went to the pub and he started preaching at the pub. He started saying, once, and there was people at the pub there, he's sitting there and goes, once you experience divine oneness, you don't need to eat meat anymore. He's telling the guy eating his burger, you don't need to, you just know that everything's one, and you're already one with the animal. You don't need to eat it. And he's like talking this sort of stuff, and the guy, eventually one of the guys says, mate, if you don't shut up, I'm going to smack you, isn't the 70s. And he goes, oh, it's fine because I feel great compassion for you. So you don't need to smack me because I know that everything's one and that we're already one and all this sort of stuff, And the guy just goes bang like that. And he said he got knocked out. The guy hit him really hard. And he said he fell on the ground and got knocked out and came back too. And I like what he said. He said, I realized that I was an idiot and that I was nothing. I had experienced everything and I was nothing. And I now needed to find the truth. And then he set on a very long journey of eventually finding Gnosis, trying to find a teaching that would help him not get back to that. Originally, he was looking for that state. But what he realized was he wanted to leave creation. Let's be honest. Do you know what I mean? He realized the truth of the reality of the great expanse of the universe. And here he was just a simpleton, living on the earth, full of ego, unable to change, not knowing what he was doing. He wanted to find the truth. He went through a lot of stuff, nudist colonies, all sorts of things. I don't want to go there, but I've got my mum kept a photo book. If I have it all, I got him. He drew pants on himself for the nudist colony parts, But like all this sort of stuff, And he went through all that, and he finally found Gnosis, and he's like, oh, thank God! He finally found the teaching that liberates man from his suffering, But at the same time, the beginning of that part is the creation of these bodies. The being and the Christ need these bodies to act through you and work with you. Yeah? To work for humanity even, to work for us. So we need to create these first. So in the beginning, we have this work of alchemy and psychological death to transmute and create the soul. Once this is created, that process slowly starts to move towards giving over the reins to the intimate Christ, which I'll talk about a bit later because it's kind of a whole thing. But just so that we understand, because in a sense, Christianity sort of talks about that now, but without having the soul. Christianity talks about you already having a soul, which is not quite correct. We have an essence, but not a soul. If we had a soul, we'd be talking divinity every night. That's it. I have the soul. I'm about to go to bed, and I'm like, I feel a little bit down. So you pray, and you feel the being like that straight away. When the human soul's created, it's like that. Okay, sometimes it's hard, but sometimes it's just like that. You feel, wow, just because the connection's there so quick, because the soul is there. That part moves beautifully between the two. And so when they talk about, accept Jesus into your heart and into your soul, that's fine if you already had the soul. So first we have to create this process. We have to create within ourselves that soul so that then, I put my pens over here, didn't I? So then, once we've created this beautiful spot, spread this beautiful spot, then the intimate Christ can come down into here and take his rightful seat in the center and then begin to free us from creation. Yeah, free us from our vices, free us from the pain of this world and the constant desires and the constant confusion, Everybody's looking for happiness. Everybody's looking for truth in everything that they do. You know what I mean? Everything that they do, whether it's a job or whatever, Yeah. Yeah. So to wrap it up, I guess, and we can have some questions, that's the point of the solar experiment. The sun wants to create like that, real men, people who are completely awake, true men and true women, or solar men and solar women. Yeah. We don't see that. The lunar force, not so much. The lunar force is against that. And that's the force of the solar force. The force of the solar force is transmutation and cooperation. Yeah. The solar force is cooperation. It's interesting. You look at our society, there's like a lot of things you can pay. Like everyone always tries to look at what's the main problem with society, and everyone's got their own idea of what it is. It's the Democrats, I tells you. It's Trump, I tells you. One of the biggest problems in society is a lack of cooperation. It's just a lack of cooperation. Do you know what I mean? It's people not working with their fellow man. It's people not working in a community. It's people not working for free anymore. Do you know what I mean? Everything has to be at my benefit. Yeah. So yeah. That's the article of the solar man. What do we think? Ask questions.
I've got a question.
Yes.
So when we're talking about the solar and lunar forces, if we look at our modern Gregorian calendar, which is a solar calendar, which is in many ways driving our society.
Yes.
And our society has become more materialistic and lack of cooperation. And
why is it a solar calendar?
Why?
Yeah.
Well,
I understand that we should usually follow the lunar cycle because it's a bit easier as far as if you want to work on a month, if you want to create a monthly calendar, if you understand what I mean. But why is it a solar calendar? I don't understand. Is that just because it's the opposite of a lunar calendar?
Maybe that was the premise I was making, that it's more based, it's more
okay.
solar calendar than the lunar calendar, which is more natural based way of looking.
Yeah.
Looking at moving with the cycles of nature, and looking at cultures that have been following lunar forces, there has been more prone to cooperation.
Sort of. See, the thing is, I think it's a pretty large leap in regards, right? So for one, the lunar calendar has really, because it's just the mechanicity of months. Do you understand what I mean? So when we're talking about the movement of the planet and of the Earth, that's just mechanical function. So yeah, a lunar calendar makes sense for that. We're talking about liberation of man, the solar force, of course, but if we're just talking about tracking what's going on, then it's not really a case of what's good and bad in that case, just a case of what's practical. You know what I mean? We can talk about a solar calendar. It shouldn't. A lunar cycle should be used in the calendar, but we would still use solar aspects for years. For instance, 13 cycles of the moon then leads to 1 year. Do you know what I mean? Which is a rotation of the Earth, and then you'd have to use. Then we still do technically follow the. Is it the ecliptic, a sidereal year, which has to do a little bit. It still has to do with the Earth, but it is actually related to the sun. But the reality is, in our science, we don't know much about the rotation of the sun itself. So I think a solar calendar would be tricky. Do you know what I mean? Does it exist? I would say in ancient times, yes. The Mayans, for instance, had amazing understandings. But in our current day, no. You know. But for tracking mechanical things, I think a lunar calendar works better. But no, it shouldn't be used for, not in the case of awakening consciousness, freeing yourself from creation. I don't think we have to rebel against the calendar, if you understand what I mean. But I completely agree that a lunar calendar is better for cycling as far as agriculture and everything. Yeah.
In a lot of the traditional medieval alchemy, there's the pictures of the symbols of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Is this usually referring to what you're speaking about the solar energy and transmutation of that?
It depends on the pictures because they all use different pictures. But usually, yes, they're referring to the solar and lunar forces within the alchemy itself. You understand what I mean? So the solar force is often referring to working sort of Christically and sort of a certain way of transmitting the energy. Sometimes it can relate to masculine and feminine, though, depending. Like often, and what they're sort of talking about there is the importance of uniting man and woman sexually to create that. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. So it depends on what's being, like the red sun represents the Christ. So that's different. Like a red sun inside the boiling beaker has to do with the process of the incarnation of the Christ. Whereas you see two people with a solar and lunar face sort of coming together, or like a sun and a moon sort of together like we have out there, that's just a symbolism to say the alchemy is necessary. So they used a lot of veiled sort of stuff. We will talk a lot about that symbolism in the week 34, something like that, 33, like right at the end of 30, like the last couple of weeks, because we give about 2 to 3 lectures on the alchemy. And one is the symbolism. So talking about the mercury, the lead, the gold, the salt of the spirit, and how that actually works, because Samael unveiled all that. It was all veiled. So no, you wouldn't know it unless you already knew it from someone who could teach you the original symbolism. You understand what I mean? Or if you somehow had a direct internal mystical experience. But yeah, it's kind of veiled. But yes, in many cases, yes.
Amazing, thank you.
That's right. Yeah. Just making a joke. Okay. Should we do a meditation? Okay. We'll make a circle here.